We're ready to start tonight to talk about fire and the element of fire. This is part of our series on the elements. If you haven't attended any of the other previous lectures we had so far, I'll give you just a brief introduction on this series that we're doing. The purpose of this series of talks is to explore the subtle elements. These are the 5 fundamental aspects of creation. We commonly refer to them as earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Now, these are more than the physical substances, the physical earth or the water flowing through the rivers and the flames of the fire. Actually, here we're talking about some fundamental, formative categories of energy that combine together make up the entire creation. So the whole creation is made up of these 5 fundamental elements. Now, this means that they have certain properties, they have certain qualities and certain functions, and they manifest at various levels. So not just the physical level, but also at subtle levels. In fact, they manifest at absolutely every level of the creation. And of course, including in our being, as we are part of this creation. So what's fascinating, first of all, about this is that the idea that we can think of all of the energies in creation as being essentialized down to these 5 fundamental categories. Now, when we are in any process of knowing, of understanding, generally this is a movement of going into something that's more general into more specific, more fundamental, more essential. Think about the scientists exploring matter. They start to break apart the matter to look what is more essential than the molecules, what's more essential than the atoms, and so on. And there we have a deeper understanding of the nature of that we're looking at. It's the same when we are inquiring into the nature of us as human beings. Who am I and what's my meaning in this life? We start off with the general things. Well, I'm my body, and as we go deeper, I'm more than that. My emotions, more than my mind. There's something more fundamental there. Or, what's the purpose of my life? Is it something just to have a job and to have a career and to have a social status and to have a bit of enjoyment? Or is there something deeper? So a process of knowing, of understanding always is taking us to something more essential, more fundamental. And this is where the value of these tattvas, as we call them in Sanskrit, these fundamental elements, comes in, because they represent the most fundamental way in which we can categorize the energy and information that exists in creation. So by learning about them, by understanding them, this is therefore going to give us some wonderful insights into the nature of reality, and of course into the nature of our own existence. I mentioned that they are called tattvas. This is the Sanskrit word. This comes from 2 components, tat, which means that, and tva means to be. So the word tattva means that which is, and it's describing the most fundamental thatness of creation. So looking at these tattvas, these fundamental elements, this is going to give us wonderful insights into how the creation functions, what are its essential properties and qualities, and this is going to be very helpful for us in developing a balanced, healthy life, and also for supporting our spiritual growth. So this was just a short intro to why we were inspired to do this series of talks about the subtle elements. I hope that's whet your appetite, or actually, to use a more fiery term, to ignite your curiosity, because that's actually what we're going to speak about tonight. We're going to speak about fire, the element of fire. Fire is fascinating, it's magnetic, it's hypnotizing. Think about staring into the flames of an open fire, or the warmth and the comforting ambience when we're sitting around the fire in the home. We can also think of the other extreme, the fires that are out of control, the wild forest fires. there is an extremely overwhelming and powerful force there. Growing up in Australia, I witnessed this firsthand. Every few years, we have a very serious forest fire. The last one, just to give you an idea of the scope of such a thing, it burned 18 million hectares of land. To put that in perspective, the United Kingdom, the entire island here, is about 24 million. So this just, on one hand, we have this incredible, even devastating and destructive force. And on the other hand, it's at the same time life-giving and life-sustaining. In fact, we have evolved with the help of fire. In the past, it's helped us to access food and to process food that we wouldn't normally have access to. We wouldn't normally be able to eat. It's kept us warm in cold environments. It's protected us from wild creatures. And in fact, this is one of the things that distinguishes us from the animal kingdom, the ability to control fire. So fire has a special place in our process of evolution. And one of the things that we want to do in this talk tonight is to highlight the importance of this element fire in the process of evolution. Now, there are many wonderful manifestations of fire. We can think in nature, the sun burning in the sky. We think of the fire, the flames of the fire. Manifestations of light, they are also like lightning, and they are also expressions of fire. And they range from physical manifestations to more subtle manifestations. Things like the sacrificial fire, the purifying fire, the fire of aspiration, or the fire of the desires and of the passions. So to get us started, we are going to do a short exercise now of identification with fire in many of these various forms. So what we'll do is we'll do a short contemplative exercise. We'll use a video clip, so we'll have an audio and visual support for this. The idea is to look at this image and the sound and to open ourselves to identify with the energy of fire behind these various manifestations of the fire element. Okay, so this is what we'll do now. So let's prepare it. If you can put on the video. It has sound, so put in your speakers if you want a good sound, your headphones, or put on your speakers. So let's prepare ourselves. So we take it like a short kind of contemplative, meditative type of exercise, observing the various manifestations of the element of fire. Let's begin. So I hope you liked that short exercise of connecting to the element of fire in its many varied forms. We saw a lot of manifestations of fire there in nature, and perhaps the most obvious representation of fire for us is the sun. After all, it is a big ball of fire. The core temperature of the sun is about 15 million degrees. But here we see a great example of fire as that which sustains life. After all, the sun is that which sustains life in our entire solar system. Without it, we'd just be a rock, an icy rock, void of life floating through space. And this gives us one of the essential aspects about fire in the way, or the essential things for life, for sustaining life, is that life permanently needs this process of combustion. There's always some process of combustion needed to maintain heat, to maintain a temperature, and to sustain the life in its various forms. Now, in the body, we can see this quite clearly in the way we need to maintain a certain temperature in the body. But also all the other processes of inner combustion, we can say, that sustain the life of the body. Digestion of food, the assimilation of the nutrients. In fact, all the metabolic processes in the body are sustained by this subtle fire element, or you can say the inner fire. You think of all those chemical reactions that take place within the cells to maintain life, the extraction of the energy from food and building other building blocks of the cells and of the internal organs, all sustained by this inner fire. Now, another thing that fire is connected with is the process of regeneration. The body is continuously regenerating itself in order to maintain health. And without this complex process of regeneration, which is made possible by this inner fire, the body couldn't keep itself alive. One of the core parts of the metabolic process is to eliminate the waste. It's consuming all of the things that are not needed in the body and eliminating them, and therefore regenerating, producing new cells. And it's a continuous process of regeneration. And this is all sustained by this fire element. While we speak about the human body, we can say that it is connected to the abdominal area, and this would be reflected physically. So when we have this energy harmoniously activated in our being, this should be reflected in a harmonious abdominal area. When this fire is weak in our being, it can result in two things. The most likely thing is that we accumulate fat, and we get the kind of belly, happening there. And this is also accompanied by a kind of inertia that we have. All of our kind of vital forces and creative forces, they kind of stay in a sort of inert state. So a person might have a lot of force there, but somehow they can't put it to work. On the other extreme, we could have a fire that's a little bit out of control and it's sort of consuming the person all the time. That would be someone who can't put on weight no matter what they do. And the fire is kind of drying them out. Now, being connected to this abdominal area, if we have digestive problems, they can be related to the inner fire, but also general problems with health, because it is connected to the sustaining the entire state of health of the organism. But in this area in particular, we talk about any kind of abdominal problems, issues with digestive problems. And also at this level, we find the predominance of the immune system. You know, about 80% of our immune system is in the gut. And this is in connection with the awakening of the inner fire in our being. There is so much information going on and processing going on in the gut area. It has its own entire nervous system, the enteric nervous system. There's a phenomenal amount of information that's being sent to the brain from the enteric nervous system. So much so that it's given been given the name the abdominal brain. So this part of our body is highly connected to our overall emotional well-being and physical well-being. More than this, though, the element is an energy. It's not just a physical manifestation. It is manifested at every level of creation, from the physical level to the most subtle levels. So let's now explore a little bit more these subtle levels, and we can have a view of the qualities and some of the benefits that might be given to us by accumulating this energy into our being. So first of all, the three essential qualities of this subtle element are the quality of heat, the quality of light, and the quality of expansion. These, we can say, are the most fundamental qualities of the subtle fire element. Now, in addition to this, fire also has an ascending direction. Just, you can think of the flames of an ordinary fire, the way they are always rising upwards. So fire as an energy, as the element, also has this ascending kind of force, ascending direction. Now, this is very easy to see when we compare it to the other elements. If we think of the earth element, the fundamental quality there is stillness, is heaviness, is cohesion, is solidness. So that's the element that's kind of keeping everything together, holding everything together. The water element, its fundamental quality there is that of fluidity. It's moving. When you think of water, it also has, it spreads out, but it flows downwards. It's always a downwards flowing energy. But the fire element is one that is going up. Actually, the only time that we find the water element going up is when we add fire to it, and when it turns into steam or in evaporation. So you see that fire is the ascending force of energy in creation. In the alchemical tradition, the symbol of fire is an upwards pointing triangle. Its shape is a kind of tetrahedron. This is one of the, like a pyramid shape. The color that it's usually associated with is red. And one other aspect we can say that being an energetic manifestation, fire has a dual aspect. That is, it has what we can call a beneficent manifestation. So that which is bringing something which is good, beneficial, harmonious, positive. And it has a maleficent manifestation. So negative, destructive, or harmful. And let's look a little bit how that would manifest in us. First, let's look at the emotional and mental level of our being. So here we're going to see how that fire element would affect the temperament of the human. So the disposition, the manner in which we respond to different situations, the way in which we behave, the way in which we predominantly think. In Tantra, this element is connected to the energetic center known as Manipura chakra. That's the third center, the one in the navel area. And there, this chakra is connected to the forming of the individuality, the forming of the personality, and the development of willpower. Now, at this level, fire is what brings intensity. So it brings intensity to the emotions. It brings intensity to our thoughts, intensity to our passions and to our desires. When this manifests in a more negative way, in a harmful way, so a maleficent way, this would manifest as the inferior passions, uncontrolled, explosive kind of outbursts, aggression perhaps even, superiority complexes, kind of getting a domination or control over others, manipulating others, and also to the low, uncontrolled desires. So going back to that fundamental quality of expansion, we can see here how this expansion has been the expansion of the ego. It's the expansion of the ego, bringing kind of pride and arrogance and insensitivity to a person. On the other hand, in its beneficial aspects, we can say this is a sublime energy, one that brings elevated and sublime desires, brings a state of effervescence. It brings an elevated state of enthusiasm. In our temperament, it would create a state of dynamism. So a person who is very dynamic and has a very strong power of action is able to, is not just the person who's coming up with ideas, but puts them to action, puts them into to a physical action there and sees results. So that kind of person would be very determined, would have a lot of motivation, very dynamic in their daily life, would also have a lot of discipline, particularly self-discipline. The energy of fire also supports a state of optimism. Think about it, it's a kind of bright energy. It gives a certain lightness, and always it's helping us to see the positive or the optimistic point of view. It also relates to a state of respect. So this is a state of self-respect, but also respect for others. And the awakened sublime inner fire also awakens in us a state of self-control. It's connected with a certain mastery over our being, a mastery over ourself. Any human being that has this inner fire harmoniously awakened will tend towards this expansion. And so getting a control over the various areas of their life, even a kind of domination, which could be even over others, but in a harmonious way, the kind of person would end up being a leader. Other people would naturally be subordinate to them because they recognize this kind of leading qualities that they have. So that would come through this accumulation of this inner fire. Another aspect relating to the accumulation of the inner fire is a state of inner freedom. Once again, we can relate back to those fundamental qualities I mentioned. Again, that state of expansion. Well, in this case, that expansion is that which is expanding us beyond our limitations, expanding us beyond our fears, beyond our inhibitions. So it's giving us this very beautiful state of inner freedom. It's allowing us to express ourselves freely. It's also allowing us to act, kind of without these inhibitions that we so often find ourselves being influenced by, thinking, what is the other person thinking of, or what will they think of me? Well, a person with a fiery temperament and has this state of inner freedom is very sincere, is very frank. Sometimes, yes, perhaps a little blunt, and it could be quite difficult to take from some other people who are sensitive. But actually, when we look at it, it's a very beneficial quality to have this ability to just be free to express how it is that we're thinking, we're feeling, and to be honest and open and sincere when we express ourselves to another person. Now, another beautiful quality of the fire element is humor. When we accumulate this energy in our being, this can awaken a very sublime sense of humor. Humor is interesting for us on a spiritual path because it allows us to overcome certain limits, certain difficulties, challenges sometimes, giving us a natural state of optimism. When we think about a state of humor, maybe you've had this experience where even you've been in a conflict with someone, an argument, and then something is said and you can't help it, but you laugh, something is funny, and then all of a sudden it's like you're in a different state. Your state has changed and you're somewhere else. It's instantaneously allowed you to go over a state that you previously felt. So this state of humor, if you think of someone laughing, it's very explosive, it's very expansive. And this is exactly the qualities that we find with the element of fire. So a harmonizing, a very balanced and harmonious inner fire is one that allows us to bring a natural state of humor to our life. We can laugh at ourselves, and let's face it, if we can laugh at ourselves, we have an endless source of humor. We can kind of play with the phenomenal world in a way that allows us to be kind of childlike and to appreciate the things that are happening right now, to appreciate the things in their fullest sense, to be light and to not take ourselves too seriously, because this can happen sometimes when we are taking very serious this process of self-development and spiritual evolution. It's a serious matter. But sometimes we need to bring in the sense of humor to put things in perspective. Sometimes just to bring that beautiful state of humor that lightens the spirit and puts things into perspective. And in this way, we can cut through some of that seriousness that might become a limitation in itself for us. So this is a very beautiful aspect of the fire element. Another quality that can be cultivated by awakening and amplifying the inner fire in our being is self-confidence. Self-confidence is this confidence we have in our own, in what we are actually. It's a confidence that moves a little bit beyond just the confidence in the qualities that we have, in the skills that we have. It's a confidence that comes through a deeper knowing of who we are. It is a confidence that comes through knowing our limits and so on, but it's more than just, as I said, our qualities and our skills, but more getting more to an essential knowing of who we are. And in this, we can be very confident in our actions. We can awaken this kind of inner state of a kind of triumphant force where we're successful in the things that we do. We're able to freely put all those skills and qualities that we have into action whenever we engage in a task and set ourselves on completing a goal. So this harmoniously activated fire allows us to surpass our limitations, to expand beyond the obstacles that might be holding us back, and to move into this very dynamic process of self-development. So these were some of the benefits and some of the qualities that we can hope to discover when we accumulate this energy of fire in our being. And now let's move on to some other aspects. And here, looking at more the spiritual and esoteric understanding of what would happen when we accumulate this inner fire. And the primary thing that I want to mention here is to see fire as the transforming agent within creation. And hence the title of this talk, A Force of Transformation, because in our reality, fire is the transforming agent. It's that which triggers this process of transformation at every level. Now, we could see that at the physical level very easily. When we looked at the sun, for example, it's transforming the very substance of physical matter. All our elements are being created there in the sun. It's a big ball of hydrogen, and as it undergoes this nuclear fusion, helium gets created, and so on, allowing the elements of our of matter to be created. This is the very building blocks of physical matter. In our body, we can also see this process of transformation happening, the transformation of food into energy. And actually, going further, just to define a little bit or clarify what we mean by transformation, because transformation is not just about change. It's not just about changing from one form to another. There is an implication here that transformation is a change to a superior form. It implies a certain elevation in that process, a certain sublimation. So when we say transformation, we're implying a change to a more elevated and sublime form. Now, this, we can see, is the way we can define the spiritual evolution, right? The spiritual evolution is a gradual and continuous, consistent movement upwards, from the gross to the subtle, from the inferior to the superior, from a lower vibration to a higher vibration, from limitation to freedom, is a process of continuous transformation. So this is, of course, very important for us, because if we are interested in self-development, if we are interested in spiritual transformation, and here we can see that fire is the very agent of the process of transformation in our reality. So behind any process of transformation, we can see the element of fire, whether that be a physical transformation, or whether that be the transformation of one emotion into another, whether that be the transformation of a limiting thought into a more freeing thought, whether it be the transformation of an attitude in our being, or the very transformation of our consciousness. The subtle element of fire sustains and supports these processes. Fire is also synonymous with ascension. You mentioned that we think of just the flames of the fire and how they're moving upwards. And I mentioned this was one of the fundamental qualities of the element, that it has an ascending direction. So just like the flames which rise naturally, so too this supports all processes of elevation, of sublimation, of transformation of the consciousness, of transmutation. And we can think here, of course, of a very powerful symbol in mythology, in the Greek mythology, the phoenix here I refer to. This is this bird, this long-lived bird that has this is cyclically regenerating itself. It's associated with the sun also, and it obtains new life by continuously rising from its own ashes. So here we see this very powerful symbol of regeneration and extremely powerful symbol of transformation, the entire transformation of that being that gives it this new life and longevity. Now, in Tantra, the obvious symbol of this is biological transmutation and sublimation. So what we mean here is the transmutation of elements that happen inside the biological system. So under normal temperature and pressure, the process of converting one element to another. This occurs primarily with our vital and creative forces, and also the sublimation of those energies. So we're talking about a release of energy with this process, and the sublimation means that we're giving an ascending direction. We're taking it from a more gross and lower vibration to a higher vibration. So for us in a spiritual practice, what that means was that these energies that are released in this transmutation process can then fuel our higher aspirations. They can fuel higher states. They can refuel the more refined emotions, states of love, states of affection. They can fuel our intuitive processes. They can fuel the higher mental processes of discernment and clarity, and higher refined processes of thinking. They can feed our spiritual aspirations. Now, very sublime aspirations to see the truth and transform. So in the tantric tradition, the integration of the amorous experience into the spiritual practice is not just to bring, a bit of spice to our spiritual practice, to give us a bit of a change to doing yoga asanas and some pranayamas and meditation all the time, but it's there to provide us with a powerful fuel for transformation. The amorous experience, when it's integrated correctly on the tantric path, gives us the most incredible fuel to transform our very consciousness. And this is the purpose of that. Now, in the Western alchemical tradition, from this perspective at least, fire is seen as the most important of the elements because it is the one that transforms everything. The secret science of alchemy is almost entirely based upon the power of fire to purify and transform. And we know this common understanding of alchemy, the goal to transform the base metals into gold. That would be the ultimate thing, transforming the elements into the most valuable element. And also, what is gold? But it's the symbol of the sun. It's the symbol of the solar element of the consciousness, actually, as we'll get to see. So, but in Tantra, we also use this term, the inner alchemy. The inner alchemy is the process where that alchemical process, in other words, that process of change, of transformation of something fundamental, occurs inside us. As I said, it's the alchemizing of an emotion, of an inferior emotion, of anger, into something more sublime, like compassion, something that goes from an emotional state that will cause us harm physically and emotionally to something that will actually serve our process of growth and development. So this inner alchemy is a process of, as I said, moving from a more gross state to a more refined and elevated and sublime state. And this is happening through and mediated through the inner fire. We also have this term called ojas. It's a very esoteric notion. Ojas is somehow, to put it very simply, the spiritual force that's trapped into the creative potential. And various yogic techniques can release this force and can take it out of release it from matter and bring it back into our being, where we can use it to fuel the elevation of our consciousness. So these are some more esoteric notions about the subtle element of fire. Without awakening the inner fire, no transformation is possible. So that's a statement for us to contemplate. It is the main catalyzing element. It takes whatever is lower, it uses it as fuel, and it feeds the upwards and descending movements towards the awakening of consciousness. So here we can speak about the fire of aspiration. I mentioned already fire is connected to aspiration. What is aspiration? Well, one way to describe it is as a burning desire to know the truth. A burning desire to get to something more essential and fundamental. To do this also means that we have to have a certain level of discipline, a certain level of self-mastery, and a development of the willpower. And this is something that is mediated by this subtle element of fire. This is a very important quality for us to have if we want to engage on the spiritual path. The great enlightened yogi of India, Swami Shivananda, made a very succinct statement when he said that there's only one thing that we need to do to succeed on the spiritual path. Let's wait for a moment for a little bit of anticipation here. And that thing is, if you can guess, to just keep going. That's it. All you need to do to succeed on the spiritual path is to continue, to keep going. And what do we need to do to keep going? We need aspiration. Aspiration is what gives us the inner motivation to continue, because sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's boring, sometimes we get lost, sometimes we get tempted, sometimes we get diverted. But there's only one thing we need to do, is to continue the process, to continue to bring ourselves back to the path and continue moving along that path. And so you can see here the value of aspiration. We could say from this perspective, it's the most important spiritual quality we could have. So the other aspect of this is that aspiration allows us, it's allowing us to overcome the lower energies of our being. If we don't do this, we're going to be trapped by those instinctual desires, by our more instinctual nature, which are actually connected to the lower chakras and the lower elements. We think about the earth, as I said, about the direction of these elements, the earth energies. They are keeping us still. They're keeping us, they are, from the beneficial aspect, they are providing us with the stability that we need to build any kind of spiritual tower there. But if we stay there, we don't move anywhere. At the next level of our being, in the creative and sexual level, well, that's giving us a certain expansion into the world through the pleasures, and it's awakening us into the beauty and the pleasures of life. But once again, if we stay there, it can remain a trap, and we stay simply with the comfort, the pleasure, the security, the safety of that instinctual life. So while these are the foundations of our life, they also become a trap for us. We need something that's powerful to take us out of those tendencies. These are connected to our more instinctual nature, if you like. It's very natural for us and instinctual for us to want stability and safety and comfort and security in our life. But that won't lead us to transformation. So we need something that takes us out of these things. And this is given by the energy of fire. Fire is awakening this aspiration to look for something more. There's got to be more to life than just the comforts, the joys, some simple pleasures. And this is what is awakened in us and gives us the power to search for that and to look for it. So fire is the awakening energy. It's giving us the power to rise above those strong, instinctual, habitual, and social tendencies, and to fly towards the lofty realms of awakening and enlightenment. So to summarize that, we can say that without the awakening of the subtle fire, no steps on the spiritual path will be possible. I mean, no evolution would be possible. And this brings us to another important aspect about fire, the subtle fire, which is purification. And this is very connected also with the process of evolution. This idea that fire, the subtle fire, is an essential force that can burn the impurities from our being. So one of the ways of looking at our process of evolution, or in seeing the things that prevent us or inhibit our process of evolution, are impurities. They are energetic blockages. They are that stop us and prevent us from sensing certain things. They are emotional blockages that lead us to have certain fears, certain inhibitions, to reject certain experiences. They are mental blockages that lead us to have certain distortions of understanding reality, and therefore to lead to confusions and so on. All of these things, we could look at them from the perspective that they are impurities in our being. So how do we evolve? How do we overcome these things which, from this perspective, represent obstacles in our transformation? We need to remove these impurities. And one of the ways is to burn these impurities, so to speak, from our being. In the same way that the chemist in the lab burns the substances there to remove all the impurities. We too can do this in our subtle being. We can burn the impurities in our subtle structure to awaken the inner energies. We can burn these impurities in our emotional level, removing the stresses, removing the tensions, burning the emotional wounds, the toxins. And this very often leads to what is known as a state of catharsis, or a cathartic state. This is where there is a certain accumulation of energy, a certain build-up of pressure, which is given by this accumulation of the inner fire, that leads to an overcoming, a very powerful overcoming of limitations and obstacles. Very often this catharsis is experienced as a certain release. Sometimes it's crying, it's releasing of tears, maybe you're screaming out loud, or the body is shaking, or there is often some kind of physiological phenomena that go with it, a very powerful experience of emotion, a release of limiting ideas and thoughts and beliefs, and a feeling of suddenly lifting from one state to another. A burning of our imperfections, we might say. So these cathartic moments are given by this accumulation of the inner fire, and at a certain moment we kind of cross a threshold, burning these impurities that would otherwise hold us back. Now, an important aspect about this, when it goes to burning the impurities, is that this doesn't always happen in a pleasant way. Sometimes this results in, I see a few of you smiling there. It's, this doesn't always happen in an easy way, and this is what we experience as a kind of suffering, right? This burning of impurities, when it happens against our will, against our wishes, is still a manifestation of fire, and it's experienced as painful because we refuse, at least at some level, the transformation that is offered to us in that moment. This manifestation of fire is, let's admit, is hard to bear. And it happens because, as I said, at some level we are refusing the process of transformation. Sooner or later, when we do this, we will experience a state of suffering. This is the default of nature. If we don't take the hints, if we don't take the lessons, then sooner or later there is an inevitable force that comes to us in nature that will push us to the question, why? Why is this happening to me? And will motivate us to take action. It puts the fire under our butt, so to speak. And finally, we will take that action that we've been delaying or avoiding or even simply ignoring for a long enough time. And we will go into those necessary steps that will make us transform. Transformation always implies a certain effort. And if we're not willing to make that effort, then, or if we simply, as I said, ignore it or reject it, then we will be forced to go through a purification process, and it will be experienced as a state of suffering. It might be a state of a feeling of burning an attachment that we have, or making us let go of a limiting perspective that we hold on to. And it's perceived as a state of suffering. Even we find in many traditions this idea of the infernos, right? The hell, so to speak, hell realms. This idea of a kind of fire that is, the torment and punishment of hell, which is seen as an eternal fire. This is a certain manifestation of the fire. The idea is not just because the creator of this world is sadist, but there is a wisdom to it. It's a purifying fire. The idea of this suffering is to remove the blockages that prevent us from making the necessary transformations. So this is the wisdom behind that. Now, for those who have the openness, for those who have the willingness to learn and to transform, subtle fire and the purifying fire in this aspect is seen even as a blessing, as something that's welcoming, because we will see that our transformation is sustained by this force. We'll see it as a necessary purifying force, and it will be that which helps us surpass the limitations, and therefore we can transform spiritually. This also requires, it's just worth to note here, a certain state, as I said, a state of openness, but also a state of humbleness. There is a certain state of humbleness that people have when they've been faced with difficult challenges. Now, if you've noticed this in life, when people have really been up against big challenges in life, sometimes perhaps ones that have led them to experience suffering, they have a certain humbleness in front of their experiences. They've learned the lesson. We can't, at some point, you can't reject what the universe is offering to you. So this is just another quality there I thought would mention, because it's irrelevant and important. So the purifying fire in this case is helping us to make the transformations and overcome these obstacles. And such a person, in fact, will see them as for what they are, as lessons, as necessary lessons that we need to learn in order for us to evolve. And they can take them with determination, with, why not, even enthusiasm, because we're going to see it as something that's necessary and beneficial for us, for our process of evolution. So for this reason, it's extremely important to understand this aspect of fire and develop the right attitude so that we know when we need to go through a process of purification. It's the attitude that will be the difference between us suffering or not. Now, another aspect of fire that is also known is what we can call the sacrificial fire. This is the idea of offering to an outer fire. It's a symbol of the inner fire, and you can use it as a symbol of burning certain limitations. Now, also in many cultures, fire was seen as a link of connecting the lower realms with the higher realms, of the human and the divine or godly realms. And quite literally, what was put into the fire was made sacred. And that was the sacrificial fire. You put something into fire, it makes it sacred. That which is burnt there turns to smoke and it ascends towards the upper regions. It's transformed into something subtle, which reaches the realms of the gods. In the Indian spiritual tradition, there is the god Agni, the Hindu god of fire. And this is the one who very often the fire sacrifices are offered to. And it's thought that through fire, man can communicate with the higher states of being, with the gods and with the heavenly spheres, and in this way cooperating in the cosmic life. Now, moving to a more sublime manifestation, a more subtle and sublime manifestation of the inner fire, and this is connected to the superior knowledge. In the Oriental tradition, the superior forms of subtle fire are in connection with the superior knowledge, especially the spiritual knowledge which removes the darkness of ignorance. So this is very often a symbol of ignorance, the darkness, and a symbol of awareness, of consciousness, of spiritual awakening is light. And this is one of the fundamental aspects of fire, light. And here we see this very sublime element of or manifestation of the subtle fire as a spiritual knowledge, one which comes to lighten up the darkness, to remove the darkness of ignorance. So the awakening of fire helps us to have these enlightening flashes of awareness, enlightening flashes of intuition. So we can see here that there is an association with the intuitive processes. We think about intuition. It's a non-linear form of knowing. We don't arrive at an intuitive knowledge through a process of deduction or reasoning. It's an instantaneous flash or penetration into the unknown, into what is previously dark for us. And for what we are ignorant of. So here we can see this connection between fire and these flashes of knowing and of intuition to penetrate into superior levels of knowing, superior levels of mind. We call them the supramental levels, higher levels of the astral worlds, which can awaken a superior form of knowledge. Through this, we have a direct and we are in contact with the knowledge in a more direct and pure form. Now, ultimately, if we take this to the highest extent, the subtle fire can be seen as a symbol of consciousness itself. So many spiritual traditions have this symbol. They see fire as a symbol of the spirit. Often you see this little symbol of a flame that recognizes, that is a symbol of the divine spirit that burns within all beings. So in the same way that the supreme spirit, the supreme self has its, we can say its own nature is an uncreated light, this makes that fire is a very powerful symbol of consciousness. So our consciousness can be best compared with light that illuminates our life and illuminates our reality. And of course, we couldn't miss from the tantric realm the fire of the erotic experience. From a tantric aspect, this is another manifestation of fire. It's one of the most frequent symbols of lovemaking. We often speak about the burning passions of people in love, in a state of amorous union, the flames of desire. We say that you say that you have the hots for someone, or that he's hot or she's hot. So there is this this connection with fire. And even when we think of the amorous act itself, it is a friction of body parts. What happens when we have a friction of two things? We generate heat. And if we keep going, we generate fire. So fire is a very powerful symbol of the amorous experience. So in conclusion then, the subtle fire, we said, is the symbol of passions, both the inferior ones, as well as the superior forms of the passions, things like the intense aspiration, even effervescent love. But it needs the right direction for that. Otherwise, it can be dangerous. And we even say that fire is dangerous. When we're doing something dangerous, we say you're playing with fire. And fire does need to be respected. It is something that can get out of control. When it is disharmonious, when it does get out of control, then we find that people, they'll tend to throw themselves into things in a very disharmonious and erratic kind of way, escalating the sensations, overindulging things, overdoing things. It's connected with this excessive consumption, just kind of consume and disregard. So this, and even with this kind of seeking more, wanting more and more all the time. So this is when the fire gets out of control and gets disharmonious. However, when it is harmonious, then it's awakened in our being through the process of resonance, then it generates a state of purification and elevation of the consciousness. Through this inner purification process, as I mentioned, it burns away everything that is harmful, burning away the stress, the tensions, the emotional wounds, the triggering and inducing these states of catharsis, and allowing us to generate profound transformations and spiritual leaps. So all these wonderful states we can hope to experience if we accumulate this sublime aspect of the fire in our being. To conclude with some practical things. So the last bit here, I have a slide just to show you, because we'll just mention here some practical methods to awaken the inner fire, so you can take away some things very practical here. So first of all, we could not go beyond mentioning the hatha yoga, the yoga techniques as methods for accumulating and awakening the inner fire. As I said, this is an energy. We can accumulate it in our being. The first of, and of course, yoga techniques are ultimately techniques of creating processes of resonance with the energies from the macrocosm. The first technique I put there is the Surya Namaskar, the sun salutation. Now, remember, this is a dynamic set of 12 movements that we go through. And not only does it create this kind of inner dynamism, but subtly we are putting ourselves in resonance with the sun, the most powerful symbol of fire and of consciousness in our solar system. So Surya Namaskar, the sun salutations, a very powerful way to amplify the inner fire in our being. It also generates this self-control in us. The yoga postures, we see them as ways of accumulating specific resonances, not just stretching the body, but here we're referring to their more esoteric nature. I mentioned a few there. They are wonderful for accumulating the subtle energy of fire, and they, of course, this happens and is mediated through the power center, Manipura chakra, the navel center. We also have the bandhas and kriyas. These are the techniques which work on the abdominal area. For those in the Yoga Tantra course, you'll be very familiar with Uddiyana Bandha. And I would say that these represent perhaps the strongest yoga techniques for awakening the inner fire. Also, we can mention here purification techniques. If you are familiar with some of the traditional yogic texts, you'll see that the yogis are just obsessed with purification techniques. They love to put themselves through all sorts of purifications, fastings and cleansing of the body in all these various ways. We discover their techniques like Vamana Dauti, this extraordinary technique of cleansing the stomach through water. We find their Shankpraxalana. It's one of my favorite purification techniques, where you purify the entire digestive tract through salt water. This is an extraordinary technique. For those of you who have done it, you'll know through first-hand experience how this makes you feel and what change of state this gives you emotionally and mentally, and how physically purified and cleansed you feel. But as I said, this is connected to the element of fire through the process of purification. The yogis were fascinated by this, not because they want necessarily to have such healthy bodies, but because they recognize the connection between the physical level and the subtle levels. Ultimately, we want to purify the emotional and mental level so that we can access the higher, more subtle and more fundamental levels of our being. And this can only be done when the lower levels are purified. Certain forms of breathing exercises, pranayamas, these are, I mentioned specifically there, the Surya breaths. These are Surya Vedana, Pranayama, and Surya Bera Kumbhaka. These are for awakening the fire breaths, the fire energies in us. One that's become very popular these days is the Wim Hof method. It's very popular. You see the Iceman, so-called Iceman, who through a series of breathing, which are essentially pranayama techniques, he's learned to control the temperature of his body and resist the cold, and also training through kind of cold exposure. So this is a way, what he's done is awakening the inner fire, actually. Now, one of my favorite techniques for this is a technique called Trataka. This is a yogic practice where it's a concentration technique where we stare with the eyes open at an external object. And this can be done with any object. It can be simply a point, a dot drawn on a piece of paper or on the wall. It can be special images which help to support processes of concentration. But we can also do it with a candle flame. This is a traditional yogic technique where you place the candle flame at eyes height, and you gaze with open eyes for a period of time into the center of the flame. And by doing this, you are putting yourself in contact directly with the subtle energy of fire through that candle flame. These are considered very powerful techniques for increasing our power of concentration and mental focus. So you get the benefits of that, but of course, as well, the benefits of the fire energy. And the specific initiation given that we give in our yoga and tantra courses, the lay yoga meditation technique, where you receive a mantra. There is a mantra of fire. It's connected to Manipura chakra. So you can, of course, meditate with the fire mantra, and this will put you in connection once again with those energies. So these are the yoga techniques, practical methods to awaken the inner fire, and some other ones, exposing the naked body to the sun. Once again, the powerful energies of the sun. We don't get much chance for that here in our sunny England, but I encourage you, whenever you get the chance, to expose as much of the body as you can. Obviously, if you have the privacy of a backyard that has good sun, you can even get completely naked. And this is a tremendous way, not just to get a good tan, but when you do it, to bring your awareness to this process of assimilating the subtle fire energies that come from the sun. And also we can do this by exposing our naked body to an open fire. Lighting a fire is a good way of improving our connection with the fire element. And sitting around a fire, if you never do this, just from time to time, go out, light a fire, sit around it, stare into the flames. This beautiful, hypnotic and fascinating effect of staring into the flames. It produces a state of well-being, of warmth, makes us cheerful and joyful. So this is a very beautiful way of resonating with the fire element. Now, another one are fire rituals. I mentioned already the sacrificial fire, where you put something into the fire and it's sacrificed in the flames, becoming sacred and taken up to the higher realms. There are specific rituals that can be done that work with the element of fire and are specifically for putting us into resonance with fire energy. Now, with this, we have a bit of time, so I do want to show you a clip from a video. This is a fascinating documentary. It's called A Fire, or The Fire Yogi. It was made around 2007, I think. And this is the story of a yogi who is primarily through doing fire ritual, has trained his ability to resonate to, I would say, to a paranormal ability or paranormal level with the energy of fire. He's performed a particular ritual which lasts for around 14 hours, I think, the ritual. He's done it over 1,000 times over the last 45 years. And he's developed such a powerful resonance with the fire. He's able to regenerate almost entirely through the subtle energy of fire. This means that he barely eats. He survives on a couple of bananas and a glass of milk and a few drops of water twice a day. And he's been doing this for almost 35 years, the last 35 years or so. He sleeps only 3 hours or so a night. And he has this incredible power of endurance and power of focus. So let's see how far he takes this. Let's bring up this clip now. So sit back and just enjoy this. It lasts for about 7 or 8 minutes. The Fire Yogi.
He performs a series of offerings in a prescribed manner. He dips the fire sticks in ghee, then offers them to the fireplace. Soon, various items are offered one by one. Now the fire begins to grow. Arundel now wraps himself with a woolen cloth covering his chest. He tells me the woolen cloth keeps his upper body warmer. For him, it appears the warmer the better. By repeating his secret mantra, Arundel explained that he was increasing his body temperature and was using wool to retain his body heat. He is slowly getting into a meditative state. I can see the transition in him. If only somehow we could read his mind. Would we ask, what is he thinking? He takes a break and again starts offering other items one by one. Even though his hands are covered with highly flammable ghee, he repeatedly puts them into the fire. I wonder how he can withstand such exposure without getting burnt and blistered. All of the food offerings you see here are specially prepared as part of the ritual proceedings. The food preparation starts at 1 in the morning and takes approximately 10 hours. He carefully places each item into the fire one at a time. He repeats this process several hundred times. Just this alone takes quite a few hours. Tears roll down his face. Arundel Swami is in a state of rapture. Later, I asked him why he was crying. He replied, "I wasn't crying out of pain or sorrow. Those were blissful tears." With a wooden stick, he is spreading the fire, distributing the glowing embers evenly around the fireplace. He is offering an incredible 4,000 small grated coconut balls, one by one. And little did I know what was coming next. Now, Arundel transcends to an ecstatic mood. Amazingly, he uses his bare hands as he spreads the fire in the fireplace. He fills up the fireplace with fire sticks. Arundel told me that he was establishing whether he had made the final connection with fire. It is from this point on that he will become fire-friendly. As the smoke begins to rise ferociously, Arundel takes his place lying on a bed of firewood. A pedestal fan blows to intensify the heat, and it is removed once the fire starts to grow. Now begins the journey into the incredible. Thick smoke begins to surround him. He adjusts himself to a comfortable position on this bed of firewood. Through the intense smoke, we see the fire sticks begin to ignite underneath Arundel Swami. The audience, including our production crew, are in awe. They are excited and anxious to see what will happen next.
This is the fire yogi. As you can see, I left in suspense. In the end, he offers himself on the fire. In that ritual, which is extraordinary, lasting for more than 14 hours, he spends about an hour and a half on the fire, being surrounded by the flames. And basically, what he's doing is putting himself in resonance with the energy of fire. He's getting total control over this process, identifying with the subtle fire. And he says that when he does this, he's unharmed by fire. He can put his hand into the hottest flames. He puts his entire body into the hottest flames. And even the clothes that he's wearing and his hair don't seem to burn when he's in that state of consciousness. And he goes into this, and that is done purely through this very, we can say almost paranormal identification with this subtle energy. So this is the fire yogi. You can find it on YouTube. It's very fascinating. I just wanted to highlight, just pick a bit out of it. You can watch the whole process in going through, and you can see indeed how big the flames get. And they even do tests on him later, and medical tests and so on, just to try and validate and verify what it is. So it's an amazing example of this. So then the further methods, I mentioned erotic fusion, and this needs to be, of course, based on love, integrated spiritually, and it's an essential condition that the energies are transmuted and sublimated. So otherwise we just amplify these erotic energies. This is an essential component of tantric lovemaking, the transmutation and sublimation of the energies. So the fire that's awakened through that erotic fusion is then sublimated, and we take those energies up to feed the superior levels of our being. Another method, practical method of awakening the inner fire is chromotherapy. So this is the use of light, colored light, and we can use orange and red. I use my red pants today. You can't see them, but I have nice red pants. For you can even wear clothes in certain colors in order to awaken the energies with these energies, resonance with these energies. Fasting is another way, another method of awakening the inner fire. You think about when you fast, it's like you can feel that digestive fire there really awake. And it feels like you can eat anything when you're coming out of a fast. So this does create it's also a very strong purifying technique. So it's both purifying and awakening the inner fire. And then finally, two other subtle, even more subtle ways, we can say, still practical, the use of crystals. There are some crystals there. This is an entire method in itself, which you need to know how to use well. So, and also I should mention, just as a little disclaimer, all of these yoga techniques that I mentioned first, it's very good to be taught them by a competent teacher, by someone who knows and practices those techniques, not just to learn them from a book, because they're very powerful techniques. It's the same with crystals. You need to know a little bit how to work with it. There's an example of some of the crystals, some of the precious stones that create a resonance with that. You can hold them in your hand, you can meditate with them. You can also charge crystals with certain energies, so they can be used like that. But these are some of the ones that have a natural resonance with fire. And then finally, medicinal herbs. So plants, of course, they have their own resonance, and various herbs that we take can awaken our inner fire. Just to mention a couple there, ginger, of course, is a fantastic plant. If you have digestive problems, ginger is one of the remedies. And also things related to the ginger family, like turmeric and galangal. There are various plants related to the ginger family. They awaken this inner fire, but in a very subtle, very harmonious way, as opposed to chili, for example. Well, chili does awaken it, but it's a kind of an agitated form of that energy, whereas ginger is very balanced, very harmonious. I think that was all the methods. I'll leave that there for a few seconds longer for you to Oh yeah. The last comment there is that you can take these as as a spiritual practice, and you can take plants like a powdered form into the mouth 4 times a day, so every 6 hours, and you do this in order to build up a resonance with the plant. This is a very esoteric way of using plants as medicine, and you need to do it for many months at a time, and this will build up a resonance with those energies of the natural energies of the plant. So this was what I had presented for you. If you have any questions in the last few minutes that we have left. Or comments. Is there anything in the chat? You can write it in the chat, or be courageous, fiery, unmute yourself. Oh.
You talked about subtle fire being a symbol of spirit. I always thought that was ether. But...
I mean, symbols are ways of representing certain aspects that makes it easier for us to understand. So yeah, ether could also be represent that from the perspective that ether is the kind of background of everything. And if we look at the background of everything, we can say that's consciousness, and somehow ether is related to that. From that perspective, yes. But from the perspective of light, this is one of the most universal symbols of consciousness. And this is one of the fundamental qualities of fire. So from this perspective, it's a very clear symbol of consciousness and the divine spirit.
Thank you.
Would you say yellow is the color of fire as well?
Yeah, so generally the red, bright red color is the main energy there. Also oranges, and it could be some yellows, although then different yellows start to change a little bit the resonance. But yeah, indeed, it is a very bright, dynamic kind of energy connected with yellow. It's also connected with humor, yellow. So in that sense, they are connected. Yeah.
What do you do if you do the practices to increase fire and you end up having too much fire? Is it just simply just cutting back on the practices? Is there balance?
Yeah, so with these kind of practices, they are they usually done they usually bring a state of harmony, a state of balance with the energies. So it's kind of rare that they would lead someone, like doing too many Uddiyana bandhas would lead someone to an imbalanced energy of fire. It might be that in some cases, like if you're suffering from ulcers in the stomach and you have this really out of balance fiery temperament, and you're seeing it affected in the body, then perhaps you can do other forms of accumulating the fire to kind of balance it out. But this is quite rare, and yeah, I would hesitate to say cut back on the practice. Usually there's another practice that you can take, which is maybe a different kind, that can bring the element into you, that's a slightly different manifestation of it, that will help to create the balance that you're looking for.
Excellent, thanks.
Yeah. And of course, that's where we need to look at the individual, and even our spiritual practices need to be customized according to our temperament, to our individual constitution, and so on. Also, by the way, systems like Ayurveda, the ancient healing system from India, this looks very clearly at and puts a lot of emphasis on the individual constitution. So the difference between in each individual persons in their the way their body and their energies and their psyche is kind of structured, and so different people will have different treatments. So those medicinal plants I mentioned, that was a very general overview. If you wanted to be very accurate with that, you could get an Ayurvedic consultation, and they could determine the precise plants that are the most beneficial for your constitution. Yeah. Well, we made it. We were nice and efficient. Look at that. Fire is efficient. We finished on time. We had a bit of a concern here. So far, nothing is burnt down. The last session, the talk that was given by Austin about the water element, the pipe burst in the ceiling and we had a flood in the yoga center. So we were kind of joking a little bit that, you know, let's stand by with fire extinguishers because we're going to have some some manifestation of fire here today. But so far, so good. We seem to stay in control. That means we have a harmonious fire. So that's very nice. Great.